And ask Marone, who will introduce our guests. Thank you.
Good morning. Okay. On December 8, 2004, President George W. Bush signed a bill, Public Law 108-447, which designated every September 17 as Constitutional Day. As such, all educational institutions that receive federal funding are required to set aside one day around the September 17 timeframe to celebrate, learn about, and reflect upon the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution is a living document that not only embodies the vision of our founding fathers to form a perfect union, but also encompasses the cultural values and social ideals of our great nation. Values and ideals such as equality, justice for all, freedom of expression and religion, and the right to pursue to our highest potential, that have endured throughout the unfolding of a national biography. This is the day that we reflect on the meaning and the intent of the U.S. Constitution, and more importantly, about our rights, as well as our responsibilities as American citizens. Today we have with us an esteemed panel of attorneys and judges from the greater Miami area who respond to questions formulated by our students from classes such as political science, U.S. history, and others. Now I would like to introduce our guest panel, Honorable Judge Gina Biovides, MDC Alumni Hall of Fame member Dr. Richard Patino, as well as Honorable Judge Del Tarquin, which he will be arriving soon. I ask that you all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. To our esteemed guests, please tell us a little about yourself after we will begin our first question.
I'll start. First and foremost, thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor to be with such distinguished members, and more importantly, to get to talk to you all students. Students who are right now in what I deem to be a place of higher learning. This is your chance and your opportunity. If I had a chance to go back to college and to university, I would take my classes a little more seriously and put a little more thought into why I was here and the greater purpose of it. And for that, to the extent that I can pitch that for right now in terms of, not that I'm much older than any of you, but if I had to do it all again, I certainly would focus on that. I was born and raised in Miami. I went to school here, went to high school at St. Brendan, went to UM for undergrad and for law school. Had the good fortune of kind of wanting to know what I wanted to do in my life fairly quickly. And I knew pretty much since the age of 5 that I wanted to be a lawyer. With that in mind, after I graduated law school, I went to go work at Legal Aid Society, and I represented victims of domestic violence for a period of 10 years. After that time, I knew that my passion for what I did, wanted to refocus that passion instead of advocacy for a particular side, is I wanted to focus more on the law. And it was based on that I turned around and decided to put in my name for application and appointment to become a county court judge here in Miami-Dade, and was fortunate enough 2.5 years ago to have received that appointment by the governor of Florida. I now have ran once for election. I was retained unopposed. So I serve in Miami-Dade County over in the civil division, where I'm now one of the associate administrative judges there. And that's pretty much a little bit about my background. Happy to answer any of the questions that you all have. And again, an honor to be here. Thank you.
Welcome.
So I'm Richard Patino. I'm an attorney here in the community. I own a practice of 5 attorneys in Hialeah, right literally right across the bridge over here. We are a litigation law firm, which means that we go to court, we go to trial, we litigate. There are times when me or someone from my firm appears before the very capable Judge Beovides. I was born in New York. I was raised in Miami. I went to Norland Senior High School. Yeah. And I went to Miami-Dade Community College. After that, I went to Florida State University
Oh, that hurts.
for undergrad. Wait, she's gonna feel better now. And then I went to the University of Miami for the School of Law.
Wise choice. Motion
Right.
granted.
There you go. See, if you ever appear in front of Judge Beovides, mention the Dolphins or the Hurricanes, whatever. Whatever your whatever it is, you're good. Anyway, I'd just like to say that for those of you who are sitting here not sure what you're going to do with your lives, I was there. I was literally probably sitting in those seats, although back then this was probably just a parking lot. Keep going, keep chomping those credits, keep taking classes, eating up those credits, go see your counselors, try to get the best grades you can, and then when it strikes you, go hard at the career that you want, at the major that you want. I can tell you that law is a fantastic major. It's a fantastic field because, as you can see, you could be a judge, you could be a litigator, you could be a professor, you could be a transactional lawyer. There's a lot of things that are very interesting. And then as far as the law goes, when you watch TV, you see, I don't know if we're going to have questions regarding the Supreme Court justice who, he's seeking to be confirmed. But you have a certain insight into the society that we live in, the laws and things of that nature. And it really is interesting. It's very fulfilling to know the law, to be in the area of law, however you decide to practice it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
My name is Dr. Glenn Dyer. A lot of you know me because you're in my class that's normally held at this exact same time over in Building 9. I am a historian and I teach history here in the Department of Social Sciences at the North Campus, and this is my first semester here. I spent the last 11 years in New York where I was teaching in higher education and also pursuing a PhD in history from the CUNY Graduate Center. I grew up though in New Orleans, Louisiana, so I'm from the Deep South, and in some ways being in Miami is a weird place, like an alternate universe of where I grew up. A little more Latin, but still a little bit Southern. I think today's a good opportunity, obviously, to hear from really intelligent and skilled people who, from the legal side of things, I think the Constitution also is something that we do need to revisit, because it's kind of a cliche when people say it's sort of a living document, in that we put new interpretations on something that was, framed hundreds of years ago. And what's important about that is that people have used that document as a way to push forward freedoms for different kinds of people in the country, and have never just accepted it as just for what it is, right? To sanction the status quo, but rather to say that this is a platform or a springboard to actually create not only a better country, but a better world. And as Miami-Dade College students who are going to be tasked with being change makers in society, that's one important kind of skill set, right, in place that we need to look for inspiration. So thanks for being here, and hopefully the questions will be good.
I would like to remind you guys that the microphones are right here and right there if you guys have any questions to ask the wonderful panelists.
That's it? Oh, that's the beginning.
All right. Hello, my name is Simone Costa. I am a second year here at Miami-Dade College studying sociology. And my question to you is about impeachment and if, for example, because I was just reading from this booklet, it says that you need to be convicted of treason or higher crimes to be impeached. And I was curious, if if our president was to be impeached, how would that affect these rulings that he's doing now, especially with the appointment of the new Supreme Court justices? If it was found that he was being treasonous, would his impeachment retract some of those decisions and actions that he has made?
That's a lot.
Study the law.
First, I guess I should say I have what you might call a working man's knowledge of the Constitution. When you go to law school, you have to learn, you take con law, sometimes con law 2, and there are certain things that you learn. A lot of times you forget. In fact, when I get a new attorney in my office and they just passed the bar exam, I tell them, congratulations, you know more law than I do, and I've been at it for 25 years. But you have to study a lot when you're in law school, and then when you get out, you do a lot of things, and you kind of specialize. So I specialize in litigation. That being said, that's an excellent question, and let me tell you what I can say off the top of my head. As I understand it, in order to be impeached, I think that it's the House, if I'm not mistaken, that.
Both chambers, right?
Right, both chambers. But if the House doesn't go along with it, then the president keeps going. That's what happened with President Clinton, isn't that right? So the House, and then you get into the whole two-party system. As you guys know, it's very much Republican and Democrat, and right now the House is Republican. So the chance of Donald Trump being, not being president is pretty slim, although we do have midterm elections coming up, and if the House were to change to a majority Democrat, then things would get very interesting. Now, regarding what would or would not stand, I think if a Supreme Court justice is confirmed while the president is still the president, I don't think that would ever be reversed. Right now, they're trying to delay the confirmation hearings and the vote. The Democrats are, I suppose. I guess they're trying to push towards it happening after the midterm elections because that could be the difference between whether he's confirmed or not. Judge?
Okay, so as a judge, we certainly have certain canons and certain rules that apply to us that don't apply to the regular citizens. Most of it, to be frank, is we kind of lose our First Amendment right to free speech and to voice our opinions and thoughts, especially under a different canon is I have to be very careful of speaking of topics that can at one point come before me in some way, shape, or form. Now, I don't see myself being a future Supreme Court justice in the near future, although never say never. But yes, subject to perhaps impeachment of that appointment, it sounds like once a Supreme Court justice is confirmed, that term is then a life term unless that Supreme Court justice is then somehow impeached themselves.
Yeah. No, I think that it would be, because of the timeline of the confirmation hearings for the Supreme Court for Brett Kavanaugh's nomination, it seems to be that would be impossible that there would be impeachment hearings if there were impeachment, because that would require the investigation that Mueller's conducting to actually bear fruit, right? That's one issue, right? We actually don't have conclusive proof right now that anyone can really take forward to say that the president has committed a crime. And so that kind of timeline, I think, depending on who, I think there's a big debate, and I think that's the Mueller thing is to be, I think he's being very slow and deliberate because I think that he realizes that the burden of proof is so high. That's true. So that's kind of the danger, and I think there's a lot of excitement from a certain part of the Democratic Party about impeachment. They're like, yeah, impeach Trump, but you can try to impeach someone and fail, and then you failed, right? So there's maybe other people who are taking a slower kind of approach. So we will see what happens. I don't think that's going to happen in any way at a faster timeline than Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation. That being said, the current allegations being made against him around questions of attempted sexual assault may actually do a lot more to derail his nomination. And in fact, I believe on Monday, he will be testifying about it, as well as the person who has accused him of this. So, and that, in fact, is bringing up a lot of, for a lot of people, bringing back Clarence Thomas's hearings and when he became Supreme Court Justice. So we will see with that. I think that those two things aren't going to go together. So.
Any more questions?
Good morning. My name is Harold, and I would like to ask you, where do you make the distinction between free speech and hate speech?
Great question.
That's something that could come in front of me, so.
Okay.
All right,
You want-
that's one of those that I can't give an opinion on.
Yeah, this is a really tough one. I'm not a legal expert on these definitions, and so I can't actually speak on where the boundaries are because I don't actually know the law. That being said, I think this is actually a huge debate in the country about defining what those boundaries are, and I think that's kind of what's happening now, this public debate, right? We assert that something is or is not hate speech, and then sort of fight about its boundaries, right? And we could say whether certain rap stars use certain words, and in what context, right? Is that word a pejorative word, right, or not, right? And I think we've seen a lot too, especially with the rise of social media, that there's a lot more blowback, right, and a lot more ability to kind of mobilize people around hate speech. And the question is, we have to kind of think about it because it is a First Amendment issue, right? What's the difference between, let's say, someone using a pejorative term, right, in an artistic work versus someone in a public place demeaning another person with the exact same word, right? Or in our own classrooms, like some of us in this class, we've read historical documents that use racial slurs, right? And the point is not to promote those slurs, right? The point is to understand them in their historical context and to understand how people thought. So when we think about things like hate speech and the boundaries of it, right, we have to be careful that we don't do things like just remove anything that has that word, because what we can do is lose the value, right, of an educational tool, right? Or even in an artistic kind of sense, sometimes certain words that can be construed as hate speech actually are important words within certain kind of certain subcultures and so on. So I think it's very situationally specific, and I don't know the law on it, but I think those are kind of the issues for me that come up. So.
Well, you were circling around the correct issue just from a standpoint of a context means analysis, which is a lot of the cases that delve into whether something is free speech or hate speech ultimately goes into a context-based. They also looking at, and again, looking back as to what today is Constitution Day, is you look back to the First Amendment and you're also going to look at what law is being passed one way or another to either curtail speech or to allow speech. And that's where the analysis comes in. The earlier question was on point on one thing, and I want to commend the student who asked the question because it said, I looked to the Constitution and I realized how can the president be removed? And that really is what every analysis, and at the end of the day, every judge, whether it's on a county level, circuit level, state level, or federal level, is the analysis of any piece of legislation that comes before the court or any issue begins and ends with a statute, provision, or a constitutional amendment. And what do those words mean and how to apply to the context before the case that's before you? So to circle back to free speech and what it is, if it's a piece of legislation that's prohibiting you from saying something, why are you doing it? Because you have the constitutional right to speak your mind in this country. If you're going to take away my freedom to do something, it's got to be for a legitimate purpose. There's got to be a state compelling interest, unless you're discriminating. If then you're found to discrimination, then the standard, the analysis changes. So it's not really the result of these cases that ultimately matter. But I encourage you, to the extent any of these opinions come out, is find out how the judge got there. What was the analysis? What did they compare to? Was it a context-based analysis? What was the prohibition, or what was the piece of legislation that was being passed to either protect the speech or to prohibit the speech? And that will kind of guide you as to why it is that these cases end up being a case-by-case analysis. And it starts off with sometimes the majority becomes the minority, and the minority becomes the majority. And we've seen this play out in colleges and universities where you have what's perceived to be, for lack of a better word, liberal-minded versus conservative-minded individuals, and either of the two extremes are prohibiting speakers on both behalves to come and speak at colleges and universities. And the question becomes, the majority out in the world has become the minority in colleges and university, and vice versa. So it's interesting, because a common saying among all of us is, we may not agree with what you're saying, but we fight for your right to say it. And that's been the beauty of this country for a very long time.
Judge, that was a lot for not being able to say anything.
It wasn't a position, it was just an analysis.
That was an excellent analysis. And you know, to just further say what the judge is talking about is anytime something is a constitutional issue, and certainly free speech is a constitutional issue, it's the First Amendment to the Constitution, then judges have to analyze it based upon the interest involved and the context. So what I can say is, and also, Judge, what you were saying about on college campuses, it's true, you have these extremes, and they're each lobbying, throwing flamethrowers at each other. And basically, when you limit, when you say this side is using hate speech, you are limiting speech. This side is using hate speech, you're limiting speech. But there certainly has to be a limit, and Professor, as you said, with social media nowadays, it's become very complicated. But it all boils down to the First Amendment and the analysis and the context in which it was used.
Any more questions?
Hi, my name is Gretchen Ocano. This is the second year at Miami-Dade College. I'm studying international relations. So my question is based on Florida Stand Your Ground laws. It is a very controversial issue here in the state of Florida, such as the cases of Trayvon Martin and also the Clearwater man that was killed a month ago. So my question for you guys is if you can give us a little bit more of context on the Florida Stand Your Ground. Basically, kind of what's your opinion on it, and what steps can be taken in order to revisit that law, and maybe if the Florida Stand Your Ground can be revised in the future.
Well, I can't give you my opinion on what I think about the law, but I could certainly give you the state of the law of the Florida Stand Your Ground. So Stand Your Ground is really falls within the self-defense statutes under Florida law. And what it does is it grants immunity for someone for essentially protecting themselves if they think they're in harm, and it's really a retreat from where Florida used to be in terms of a duty to retreat. So what it does, it completely takes away the duty to retreat, and it goes back to the ages of the Castle Doctrine, which is you had the right to protect your home. And what it does, it extends that Castle Doctrine now to you have the right to protect yourself in several circumstances. So initially, the way the law was framed is to grant that immunity to a person that was defending themselves. And when they went to court, if they were the defendant, the prosecution went and charged them with a crime and they felt they were acting in self-defense and Stand Your Ground law applied, the burden was on the defendant to show by preponderance of the evidence that the immunity applied. Recently, this legislature changed that in 2017 and amended that and said, no, that's not what we intended to say. What we intended to say is that the state carries the burden to prove by clear and convincing evidence that the immunity doesn't apply if the defendant raises it. So it shifted both the burden of proof from the state of the law it shifted from the defendant to the state, and it shifted what the burden is. So in the courts, what's being played out is several questions. Number one, is the 2017 amendment constitutional from a separation of powers doctrine? And it stems to the fact that under Florida Constitution, the rulemaking authority on process and procedures falls squarely within the Supreme Court, whereas substantive changes to the law fall squarely within the legislature. So the first question that the court the courts are addressing is this change to the Stand Your Ground a procedural change or a substantive change? And if it's procedural, did this legislature overstep its boundaries under its powers and authorities under the state constitution to enact the law? And that's question number one. Question number two is, if it's found to be constitutional, do you apply it retroactively? What that means is, if the crime occurred in 2015, the case is currently pending, and in 2017 the legislature changed it, do you apply that change to the 2015 case that's still pending and hasn't been decided? And that also kind of falls into, is this a remedial statute or is this a substantive statute, and how to apply it? Right now, the state of the law is, it depends on where you are, how it's been construed. Here in Miami-Dade County, our appellate court falls within the 3rd District Court of Appeals. The 3rd District Court of Appeal has found that the law is constitutional, but that it cannot be applied retroactively. So it can only be applied prospectively to cases since the amendment came. What they found is that essentially this was a substantive change to the law going forward. It shouldn't be applied retroactive, but they found it too based on Article 10 of the Florida Constitution, which kind of says that if you're going to change a statute or any law that affects prosecution of a crime, it can be applied retroactively. So they actually did a 3-part analysis. The 2nd District Court of Appeals went the other way. They found that it is constitutional, but that to the extent that it's procedural and substantive. So there's been other cases that have found that the legislature has the authority to sort of promulgate rules that affect so long as there are also substantive changes. So they didn't overstep their boundaries under a separation of powers doctrine. And number 2 is it could be applied retroactively because it was remedial in nature. Because there's a conflict between the 2 courts, the Florida Supreme Court will decide the issue.
Wow, that's excellent. That was a great review there. All right. What I can say is this, what Judge Benavides mentioned about the castle doctrine is this. Ordinarily, the law doesn't permit you to shoot someone, let's say, to use deadly force. Like, let's say you're walking down the street and some guy raises his fists at you. You can't shoot him unless you really think that your life, or rationally think that your life is in danger. The castle doctrine says slightly different. If you're in your home is your castle. If you're in your home and someone breaks into your home, you have more of a right to use deadly force. So what this statute did is it extended it essentially to outside of your home. And keep in mind that, we are the United States of America. Every state, the way the Constitution works is that it's called federalism. The country, the nation, the national government, you can say, has certain powers, but anything that is not listed in those powers goes to the states. That's essentially how they got all of these states to kind of join together. So the state of Florida happens to have this very aggressive statute, which I personally think is overly aggressive, and I'm allowed to give my opinion because I will not be a judge on any panel that I know of deciding this, and I'm pretty sure I won't become a Supreme Court justice, although I wouldn't doubt Judge Benavides becoming one. So as far as, and to your question, where are you? Oh, what is your name? Gretchen. What is it? Gretchen. Gretchen? Okay, great question. What the judge said is a great, because part of your question was what can be done to overturn that's exactly it. All of those steps follow the course that needs to be done. And as the judge said, since there is a conflict, it's based on conflict, yeah, that it will be heard by the Supreme Court of Florida.
After those very legalistic things, I'll just give you my opinion. Because I think what's made this kind of an important kind of flashpoint is the broader question over the last, let's say, 6 or 7 years around racial disparities in policing, right, and racial disparities around whether or not people are prosecuted for crimes, right? That's been a long-standing issue in the United States, but it's significantly come to the fore, specifically because of the case of Trayvon Martin and his death. So I think that this becoming a problem and being a repeated problem points that there's some kind of issue, right, that that there are racial disparities, right? And that there are cases where people are, it seems to be deliberately starting confrontations, and the confrontations that they initiate produce them killing someone else, right? Which to me doesn't seem to be the way that this is supposed to work. This is conceived of as a self-defense kind of mechanism, right? Oftentimes that I am minding my own business and then someone comes into my business, not I start a conflict with someone else that then escalates, right? And sort of, and I think that's especially with this most recent case. There's video of it, and I think, you know, the Trayvon Martin case as well, there was not video, there was some audio. So at the end of the day, this is one of the problems we have. It's someone's word against someone else. And we have one survivor, right? So a dead young man can't speak for himself, right? So he's obviously not going to get equal hearing, right? He can't share his side. So it's clear that there's some major issues. I mean, whether there's a political will to actually like deal with it, right? Or to say, hey, we actually have major problems with racial disparities in policing and so on, and we want to handle them. That's a whole other issue. But I think it seems to be that there's some kind of legal stuff. And obviously, this is just my opinion, right? And no one else is here on this panel.
Any more questions? You guys are welcome to ask more questions.
Hi. This microphone's a little tall. I'm Professor Respis in the School of Justice, and I just have a question. What are your thoughts, any one of you, about the amendment that's going to be on the ballot this November for restorative justice? Could you just make a comment about that?
Amendment 14.
What is the amendment? I'm sorry?
Yeah, Amendment 14.
Restoring the right to vote.
Right, right. Well, I can give my opinion. You know, Florida seems, you know, I mean, I've lived here most of my life, but Florida does seem a little backward in some regards. I don't know a lot about the issue, but what I can say is this: when you're charged with a crime and found guilty of a crime, there is a punishment. The punishment is that you go to jail. Taking away someone's rights to be a citizen, especially the right to vote, seems backward to me, in the sense that the idea is to rehabilitate and to jail should be a way to teach people that being, you know, going against the grain, going against the rules of society have, you know, it has consequences. So you go to jail. When you come out, I think we should welcome people back into society, show them that they have a voice, instead of isolating and ostracizing, which again seems to be the wrong way to go about it. I think that they should have their rights to vote restored. But it's a political issue, you know, and again, it all comes back to Republican versus Democrat, and who they think, you know, which way they will vote, which way convicted felons would vote, or some minority will vote. Ultimately, I hope that your generation is the one that comes up with a third party that does away with all this nonsense, and, you know, maybe things will be run a little better.
Okay. Well,
That was a hot potato for me.
well, I think obviously I think Mr. Patino said very straightforward that there are a lot of other consequences for criminal activity, and we even have the saying, "You do the crime, you do the time." Right? The question is, do you need to live your life in an entirely other citizenship track, right? That's totally separate, right? With fewer rights and fewer opportunities. I think the answer to that is absolutely not, right? I think it's silly that people who committed felonies and who have paid a price, sometimes many years of their lives, and, you know, and there's, for some people, they deeply regret it, and there's other people, yeah, maybe who don't fully regret what they did, and you know, but at the end of the day, if we are keeping someone from what we consider to be a fundamental democratic right, I think we're doing not only a disservice to that person, we're also doing a disservice to the broader political community, right? And in Florida, I believe there are about 1 million people who can't vote because of that, right? And that's a lot, right? That's a lot of people to say you'll never be able to vote again. In other states, obviously, you can get your rights restored after a certain amount of time and so on. And just to also add to what was said, people also don't just go to jail. They go to jail and then they go on probation often and parole. And so for many people, it's actually a much longer scenario, right? So you might spend something like a decade or more disenfranchised, but maybe you went to jail for 2 years, right? You may spend 8 years on parole, right? So, and that's under significant watch, right? So there's very easy ways to kind of lose your freedom again. So to complete that process and then to not be restored one of your basic rights, I think it's against the vision of the United States and what we propagate, I think, globally as well.
What I was going to add to that, it's actually something very interesting for those of you who are interested in the law or even history in general, is that this is what's going to be on the ballot this November is going to be a couple of provisions so there's certain ways to change the Constitution. One, it can be done by 60% of the legislature, and then it goes on a ballot. But there's another way of doing it is through the CRC, the Constitution Revision Commission. And that convenes once every 20 years to get together, and the way the members of the CRC are picked is interesting in and of itself, but these members get together, they go around for, I think it's 2 years, the last 2 years, they've been going around the whole state having town hall meetings to figure out what changes, if any, need to be made to the Florida Constitution. So I think they've put together roughly about 12, like it's not 13, I know it's 13, but not all of them have been through the CRC.
13.
How many?
13.
13, yeah, and one is not by the CRC.
Yeah.
There's like an active citizenship for petitions that went in, but roughly about 13 proposals that have gone in through the CRC. Some have been challenged in the courts, and then I think the Supreme Court, the deadline is the 22nd of September to decide what actually makes it into the ballot. So if any of you are interested in what the proposals were and how do they each are going to affect the Constitution, that's kind of going to be on your ballot in November. And just refresher, they need 60% of the vote in order to actually change the Constitution.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to add on to the question. Don't you guys also think there should be a limit to who is allowed to vote based on felony? Because there are many things that can be considered as a felon, like murdering somebody. Do you think these people should be allowed to vote as well as others who just commit like a little tiny felon, like stealing a car or something? I don't know.
I'm going to turn off my mic. No.
Sure, I'll do it. I think, so the question was, do people who have been convicted of very, very serious crimes deserve to vote? I think at the end of the day, it sounds, we want to be always as harsh as possible and so on, but I think at the end of the day, we have to say that there are sometimes things that people do that we think are irredeemable, but does that make them not human and not have certain rights? I think the answer is no, that they actually are human, right? It doesn't make them unhuman. They still have rights. So, and I think that's one of the things, right? We are not perfect people, right? And there are many horrible things, and we know terrible things have happened to family members and friends and so on. The question is, do we sacrifice kind of a broader vision? And I would hope that we wouldn't. So people should be able to vote.
I would agree.
All right, folks, well, that is today's event. Let's give all of our wonderful panelists a hand. Thank you for being here. Each of you had the opportunity to take or to receive a Constitution booklet as you came in. Why don't you actually look at it? It might come more in handy than you think. We'd also like to thank our student government, internal affairs representative who did a fantastic job. And with that, thank you so much for being here. Remember, it is up to you to become involved with your community and your local government. So take that opportunity, and if you have not registered to vote, please, please do so. Thank you and have a fantastic day.
I know, finally.
Thanks. All right. No idea that statue was There you go. Was so heavily litigated and
Oh, the standard
handed
ground.
out, yeah.
It comes up in almost any case.
It does, huh? Stand your ground.
Even in misdemeanor court.
Really?
It's raised, yeah. Yeah, there's challenges in county court.
Testing.
So I think
Good
the
evening,
Attorney
everybody.
General came once. Still coming in because once you challenge the constitutionality of the statute, the AG.
Believe me, we know.
Yeah, right. Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ms. Garkova. She is representing our dean today who had to be at another campus. This is
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Gina, and this is
Hi,
Gina
Gina.
Rodriguez.
Nice to meet you as well.
Thank you so much again for being here.
Love to do it.
We do have a plaque for you, however, they're not